We're on lesson 1 of chapter 6, which is fractions, decimals, and percents. We have worked with fractions and decimals before, but we haven't worked on percents yet, so that'll be our main focus of this lesson. We're going to write decimals as percents, we'll write fractions as percents, and we're going to order rational numbers. Let's start by talking about the concept of percents. When we say percents, we mean per and then cent. Cent means 100, so per 100. So for example, if I had 8%, that would be similar to 8 per 100. And another way to write that would be 8 over 100. So this would also be another way to write 8%, 8 per 100. As we read this chart, which has 100 squares, we can write these sections out in fractions, decimals, and now we can write these out in percents as well. For example, if you look to the wall climbing section, I see that out of 100 total squares, I count a total of 8. So if I was to write this as a fraction, I would write 8 over 100. As a decimal, we know that to write decimals, we need to write 8 in the hundredths place. This would be 8 hundredths of the entire place, so 0.08. And then if we're going to write that as a percent, it would be 8 per 100, so we would say 8%. Then weight training. Weight training looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if I'm going to write that as a fraction, I would say 9 out of 100. Writing it as a decimal, I would write 0.09, which would be 9 hundredths. And then as a percent, I would say 9%. Cross training then. Cross training looks like 15 total boxes. So if I write that as a fraction, it would be 15 over 100. Decimal would be 0.15, 15 hundredths. And then as a percent, I would say 15%, 15 per 100. Tennis courts would be 12 total, so we'll say 12 over 100. As a decimal would be 0.12, 12 hundredths, and then percent would be 12%. I think we have this down by now. I have a cafeteria which has 9 blocks, just like the weight training. So that'd be 9 out of 100 for my fraction. Decimal would be 0.09, and then my percent would be 9%, 9 out of 100. First, we need to write decimals as percents. And we're going to learn two different ways to do this. First, we'll use the fraction method, and then we'll use the decimal method. I know that 0.2 could also be said as 2 tenths because it's in the tenths place. So we could say 2 out of 10 and make that our fraction. Well, I know that percents are per 100. So I need to convert this 10 into 100. I can convert that into 100 by multiplying times 10. 10 times 10 equals 100. And then 2 times 10, if I do the same thing to the top, would be 20. So if I'm going to write this as percent, 20 out of 100 would be 20%. So that's the fraction way. If we're going to do the decimal way, we notice that the decimal and the percent look very similar to each other. All we had to do was actually move the decimal over twice to the right. So let's do that with 0.2. We start our decimal 0.2. If we move that decimal over once and then twice, then we fill that extra space with a 0, we would learn that that would be 20, so 20%. Let's do 0.875 as a fraction and as a decimal as well. So 0.875, it's 875 thousandths. So 875 over 1,000 would be my fraction. But remember, this needs to be out of 100, so I would need to divide both these numbers by 10. So divide by 10, divide by 10. 1,000 divided by 10 would be 100. 875 divided by 10, we're going to drag our calculator in here. 875 divided by 10 is 87.5. So that'd be 87.5 over 100. So that would be our percent, 87.5%. If we do the decimal way, we could write out 0.875. And then just like before, we move that decimal over twice. 1, 2, 87.5 would be our answer. So 87.5%. Now we need to turn fractions into percents. So on the left side again, we're going to use the fraction method. The second way, on the right side, we'll use the decimal method. So we have 4 over 5 for our fraction. we need to turn that bottom number into 100. Well, I know 5 times 20 would equal 100, so therefore we need to do 4 times 20 as well. 5 times 20 is 100. 4 times 20 is 80. So I have 80 out of 100, which I know would be 80%. So that would be my answer. So then we could do the decimal way. We've turned fractions into decimals before by treating it as a division problem. So we have 4 divided by 5, which gives us 0.8. And then we can move our decimal over twice. So 1, 2, have a 0 here for that spot, and that would give us 80%. Now we have 8 divided by 15 as a percent. I know that 15 doesn't multiply into 100, so for these ones I'm not going to be doing the fraction method. Because if I do 100 divided by 15, that's a big decimal. So we can skip the fraction method on this one. We could just turn it into a decimal right away. So 8 divided by 15, which would be 0.5333. So if we write this out as a decimal, 0.53, but the 3 keeps going on forever. We could still turn this into a percentage. We can move that decimal over 2 spots, so 1, 2, which would leave us with 53.3, which goes forever. So we could write that out, 53.3. Remember, if we could show that it repeats itself by putting a line over that 3, and then this would be our percent, 53.3%. So you can have decimals in your percents. That is okay. Now we need to order 1 4/5, 0.33, -1/6, 3, 2 1/5, and 70.2% from least to greatest. So if you notice here, I have a fraction, a decimal, a whole number, and then a percent. This is just going to be a little bit of a mess if you try to use all 3 different types. So what I do is I turn them all into decimals. So for example, I have 1 4/5, so I have 1 for my whole number. Then I could do 4 divided by 5, which would give me 0.8, so it'll be 1.8. I have 0.33, which is already a decimal, so I can leave that there. -1.6 is already a decimal. 3, I can just do 3.0, or just 3. I have 2 1/5, so 2 point, and then 1 divided by 5 is 0.2, so 2.2. And then turning a percent into a decimal works backwards what we did with these ones. Remember, we moved them over to the right to turn them into percents. Turn them back into decimals, we move them to the left. So if we move this decimal over twice, we'd be left with 0.702. So we can write that in. So I'm going to have a 0 in front of that point. So now let's order these. I see a negative here, so that's automatically going to be the lowest because it's furthest to the left on the number line. So if I plot this out, -1.6, that's a little closer to -2 than -1. So I'm going to put that spot right here. So -1.6. So I'm going to cross that out. The next lowest would be anything with a 0, which would be 0.7 or 0.3. I know that 3 is lower than 7. 0.33 is closer to 0 than it is to 1, so I'm going to put that closer to 0. So 0.33. The next one would be 0.7 then, 0.702. That's closer to 1 than it is to 0. So if you're going to draw this off, I'd have draw my line 0.702. And then I'm left with 1.8, 2.2, and 3. Well, 1.8 would be the smallest because its whole number is 1 instead of 2 or 3. So this would be 1.8. The next one would be 2.2 because that's the next lowest whole number. So 2.2. And then just 3 we are left with here. So 3. So if I'm going to write this out, now that I have them all listed from left to right, I can order them from least to greatest. So -1.6, 0.33, 0.702, 1.8, 2.2, and 3. So there they are listed from least to greatest.